so great to see so many of you. It's a greatest pleasure to be here, and we're very excited for you to see the film. I'd like to give one special thanks to a very special person who was instrumental in the creation of this film. It's Martin Scorsese, and it was... And it's his love of British ghost stories that was one of the big inspirations for making this film, and he was an incredible supporter through the whole shooting and editing and making this film. So a huge thanks to him. Enjoy the screening.
Hello friends, thank you for coming, and we'll see you later.
A couple of questions to both of you, and then we can open it up to the audience, because I know it's great to have a dialogue with the audience when they come here, even though I have tons of questions. You know, we could probably go all night. Can we cancel the next film? No. I just wanted to start maybe by asking about the sense of time in the film, that I find quite interesting, because if we think about the Souvenir 1 and 2 that we played here also in the festival and opened, you also work on the sense of time about yourself, but reflecting about yourself in a previous life. In here, you reflect about yourself in sort of a present time. At the same time, the movie is very, I wouldn't say dated, but it really deals with older era. And you're mixing both the time from today to the past while representing yourself nearly contemporary.
Well, that's a really great question, because actually we haven't been asked that question before, and it's true because I tend to think in my mind's eye, I see it as something quite present and linear in a way, but it's really not. And the Rosalind that Julie is talking to is a Rosalind, not the Rosalind, not always anyway, the Rosalind that that she was with when she died, but a Rosalind. I mean, when I think of my mother, who's not around anymore sadly, but when I think of her, I don't think of her in her last days. I think of her at different stages in her life that I knew her, and a lot I think of her around the age of Rosalind in most of the film, which is sort of early 70s. So it's sort of a very positive stage in her life, and so, but we see Rosalind at different points, and then of course we see her before she dies. But yes, that's interesting.
You work in the sense of time that's quite unique in your work also. And also there's something else that you do a lot. It's talking about relationships. All your film deal with relationships, but these are definitely like personal relationships in a more obvious way than the other one. So you have to play sort of versions of Joanna's mother, really. I think you are well acquainted with the family, and it probably helps in some way, but maybe not necessarily. So can you talk about how Joanna asked you to play that role specifically? You don't really write long scripts, so she gives you ideas, some documents, things to embrace.
Well, this film, like all films, is a fantasy. And it is inspired by Joanna's thoughts and experiences with her own mother, but also by mine with mine. And it is true that we've known each other for a very long time, and I've not only known Joanna, but I've also known her mother since I was a child. And we've been talking about our mothers and our relationships with our mothers for 50 years. And all of that talk and all of those wonderings have only got us so far. I mean, we still have to employ fantasy because we're dealing in the realm of art. But yes, the inspiration there in the souvenir films, when Joanna first asked me to work with her to sort of make a portrait of the mother, yes, she was inspired by Joanna's mother, but also by my own. And then she became Rosalind, who is something of her own. And when we started talking about this film, originally it was a woman and her mother, and it wasn't necessarily going to be Julie, it wasn't necessarily going to be Rosalind. But at a certain point we realized we were so enamored of Rosalind, we loved her from the souvenirs, and we didn't really get enough of her. And so then we decided to work within the paradigm of Julie and Rosalind. So yes, it's interesting. I'm thinking about your question about time, and also I would suggest that Joanna works with the sort of material of memory, what I love about her approach is that she's in looking to kind of catch that in a bottle. She acknowledges, and this is one of the reasons she's been able to make these films, that it's impossible, that these memories are not only kind of impossible, but they're irrelevant. They're just inspirations. They're just sort of weather, you know? And they pass. And they're not, it's like Rosalind says in The Room, you know, the rooms, they hold all these memories, and it's a muddle. It's all so much weather, really.
But I think it took me a while, certainly with the souvenirs, before I made those, to have the confidence in my faulty memory that I could make a film that was a kind of memoir, but not really remember anything.
We understand. You also, I think you shoot in sequence usually. Is that sort of not challenging to play? You know, not only she doesn't really give you a script, so you have to collaborate all along, but also she shoots in sequence and you're playing a double role. So you're going across to make sure it connects, but isn't that a little bit sometimes difficult to mathematically like connect to like at what stage I am, like why you have the costume and you have your internal process, but it's still a little bit difficult, no?
It's grace.
Okay.
It's absolute grace. There is no script, it's true. There is a document which Joanna works out very diligently over many, many months and actually years to produce. It's like a little key. But it's a little key, and it doesn't involve any dialogue. And it is an indication, I would say that it's almost closest to a short story, this method. And I work with her on other films where she will produce this document. And it scrupulously doesn't indicate any dialogue at all. It's all about energy and usually about inarticulacy and the fact that these people can't really communicate, which is a really good place to start when the director says action, and you might feel under pressure to find something to say. But that's the deal and that's the material, particularly in the case of this film, which is about a mother and a daughter trying to accept that they can't really communicate with one another ever.
I mean, it would seem with this method of shooting in story order and improvisation that it would be impossible to shoot something with this conceit. And I was determined to not change the way that I work, not because I'm stubborn and just want to work that way for the sake of it, but that it does produce such magic. And I'm so interested in not knowing what's going to happen next and having the freedom to change my mind or our minds. It's so exciting to work in that way. It can be nerve-wracking sometimes, and sometimes the crew find it difficult because everyone likes to plan, and I don't allow people to plan anything. But it really, I feel I have to find whatever film I want to make. Has to have this way, and for Tilda and I to be having this conversation whilst making this film, having had a conversation, as Tilda says, for 50 years or so, was an incredible pleasure. And so the Julie and Rosalind are having conversations, and Tilda and I are having conversations, not just literally, but in terms of the ideas and the themes and the depth of what we're exploring. I don't think it would have been possible to go to the depths that we went to, that Tilda went to, I would say, without this friendship that we have.
And it's a very moving film, and it's very touching, and I think even though it's very intimate and personal, it does speak to everybody about that moment in your life where something happened and you try to capture it with memory and thinking about how you could have handled things or entered dialogue. But to put it on the screen like this and not feeling, like just sentimental or just on the surface, it's very, very difficult, and it's something that you managed to do really well, and I think it was thanks to the collaboration between both of you. However, we are maybe grateful for the change of tone sometime in the film, because there's obviously the ghost story too, which are creepy but yet sometimes a little funny. There's the clerk at the hotel that also changed the tone and changed the rhythm of the film and bring us to reality. So you managed to balance it out with like humor and a sort of reality, like, yeah, I could totally be there. The clerk would bully me, for sure. I know that. And of course, you have a great dog. Louis is the best. So, Louis is your dog?
Louis is my dog.
It's very personal now. So who directs the dog then?
Louis directs himself. No, Louis, for those of you who are familiar with the Souvenirs 1 and 2, you will have met Louis's family. In Souvenir 1, Louis's mother, Rosie, and his aunt, Dora. And in Souvenir 2, Dora and Rosie were joined by his nephew, Snow Bear. But Joanna and I, we were thinking of him maybe to join the pack in Souvenir 2, but I had this instinct that he needed a solo.
But someone needs to give him an award, because the other dogs got an award, and Louis is really the deserving one.
When we were shooting this film, we did talk quite seriously at lunchtimes about, well, we have to show the film in Cannes so that he can get a palm dog. And then we took the Souvenir 2 to Cannes, and the other dogs got the palm dog.
I was working at the Cannes Film Festival in the selection. We did invite the film, but in the wrong section, I guess.
Yeah.
However, we do have a Golden Beast Award here at the New York Film Festival.
Oh, really?
And Louis is a strong contention for. It was nominated. We do have 6 donkeys that are like going after, so it's very difficult. But Louis is really like, he definitely is going to get something. So we'll keep you posted on how that.
He doesn't need a prize. Who needs a prize? No, I mean, he's there because he's there, and because this family, once we had decided that these were the hearts we were going to be following in this film, Julie and Rosalind, that there had to be a Springer Spaniel, because, there just has to be. What I love about his presence also is, Julie is a filmmaker, and there are all these references, and Joanna and I kind of shamelessly referencing some of our favourite filmmakers, some of our favourite films, and he is our reference to Bresson, Au Hasard Balthazar, and there's something about Carly, who plays the receptionist, which for me is very Kathleen Byron in Black Narcissus, and there's this constant reference to many of our favourite films, but he's our Bressonian spirit.
That's why I'm worried about the EO donkeys, because it's very difficult. I'll ask maybe one last final question, talking about references. Clouseau, maybe the Diabolique, it's a very striking moment when we see this sort of shadow on the glass and the window, of the hotel, which is when you realize there's something definitely ghosty and scary, but then really, really deeply emotional, and that obviously remind me deeply of Les Diaboliques because it's the scariest moment in the film.
Well, actually, I haven't watched it recently. I have watched it in the past. I wasn't thinking about that, but it was much more about ghost stories. M.R. James, obviously, and I mentioned about Martin Scorsese being such an influence on the film, and he gave me a short story by Kipling called They, which we see Julie reading at one point, and that story really changed the way the film went, or rather it made me realize you could make something or write something that was ghostly and quite scary, but also deeply emotional, because it was the first time I'd read a ghost story and cried at the end of it, and that was, and it's such a personal story for Kipling, from what I gather of his life. So that probably was the thing that was the most influential in a way.
For someone who writes short script with a lot of literary influences, really.
And then my aim, as Tilda mentions this document I write, my aim was to write a ghost story before it became a film, that what was on the paper was a ghost story. I'm not sure if I succeeded actually, but that was my aim. We
can take some couple of audience questions. So raise your hand.